world expected Jasmine Crockett to play by the script. She was given polished remarks carefully prepared by diplomats, full of the usual promises and polite language. But when she stood before President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, she chose a different path. She looked him in the eye and pushed aside the papers. Her voice carried weight not of rehearsed diplomacy, but of raw truth. "I am not here to sell the idea that America is doing Africa a favor," she declared. The room stiffened. A few aides shifted uncomfortably. Crockett's tone was not confrontational, but it was unshakably firm. "I am here to ask what African nations truly want." In that moment, she broke through decades of empty gestures and patronizing rhetoric. She challenged the very foundation of U.S. foreign aid she described as control painted over with the brush of generosity. The words stung. It was a direct rebuke to the system she herself was supposed to represent. As her speech unfolded, she invoked history. She spoke of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader who once dared to reject neocolonial influence and paid the price with his life. "He was silenced," Crockett said, her voice lowering with respect, "for refusing to bow, for believing his people deserved dignity." The air in the room shifted. President Traoré, a man hardened by years of struggle and suspicion, leaned back in his chair, studying her. He had faced countless speeches from American officials, each wrapped in polite promises and veiled demands. But this was different. Crockett wasn't asking Africa to be grateful. She wasn't packaging control as charity. She was demanding something far simpler yet infinitely more radical: to listen. "Africa doesn't need saving," she said, the words ringing like a hammer against stone. "It needs to be heard." For a moment, silence swallowed the room. The kind of silence that comes not from apathy but from being struck by truth so sharp it leaves no space for response. Cameras clicked, but no one dared to interrupt. Then something unexpected happened. As Crockett's words hung in the air, President Traoré's stern expression began to change. His eyes glistened and his composure faltered. Slowly, tears welled, then fell, not as a show for cameras, but as a man unburdening years of exhaustion, memory, and the endless fight for dignity. Those tears carried meaning. They were not simply about her words, but about everything they awakened: the ghosts of Sankara, the struggles of a nation, the fatigue of carrying resistance on one's shoulders for years. Crockett had done what no polished speech had achieved. She pierced through the armor of politics and touched the raw humanity beneath. And in that instant, the world saw something rare: not just a leader challenged, but a leader moved. The world was not ready for what came next. President Ibrahim Traoré, a man known for his stoic resolve, sat quietly as Jasmine Crockett's words echoed in the chamber. His face was wet with tears, but these were not the fragile tears of weakness, they were the heavy tears of memory. They carried the fatigue of decades, the echo of battles fought against invisible chains, and the ghosts of leaders who dared to defy. Traoré reached for a handkerchief, trying to compose himself, but there was no denying what had just happened. For the first time in years, someone from the West had spoken to him not with superiority, not with hidden strings, but with honesty. And honesty in that moment broke him open. Those present in the room shifted uneasily. Some American aides exchanged glances of shock, whispering frantically into their devices. This was not the headline Washington wanted. Crockett was supposed to deliver reassurance, to sell the illusion of benevolence. Instead, she had burned the script. By the time footage of the speech hit the internet, it was too late to contain. Clips spread across social media like wildfire. Hashtags trended: Africa Speaks, Crockett Truth, Neocolonialism Exposed. Some celebrated her courage, others condemned her for humiliation. In the US, commentators wasted no time. On television panels, her name was dragged through the mud. "She embarrassed the nation," one anchor fumed. "This was reckless, unprofessional, and damaging to our global standing." Politicians lined up to denounce her, accusing her of betraying American interests. They said she had weakened diplomatic ties, that she had made the US look arrogant and unstable. But outside those political halls, another story was unfolding. In Burkina Faso, the impact was seismic. Traoré did not call a press conference. He did not issue statements. Instead, he quietly retreated to a remote village, a place far from cameras and microphones. There, in the midst of dusty roads and modest homes, something unexpected happened. A young boy approached him barefoot, carrying a small wooden sculpture. It was simple, carved by hand, but on its base were etched the words, "Kindness unites worlds." The boy handed it to Traoré with a shy smile, and when Traoré looked down at the gift, the tears returned. This time they weren't for exhaustion, they were for recognition. His people had heard him, they understood his struggle, and in their eyes, Crockett's words were not an insult to Burkina Faso's dignity, they were a vindication of it. The sculpture found its place on his desk not as decoration but as a symbol, a reminder that leadership was not about controlling narratives but about carrying the voice of the people. Meanwhile, back in America, Crockett faced the storm alone. Headlines called her reckless, analysts predicted the end of her career, and whispers filled the corridors of power. Yet, while her reputation burned in Washington, her words were planting seeds across Africa. Seeds of courage, seeds of dignity, seeds of something larger than politics. Back in Washington, the backlash against Jasmine Crockett had reached fever pitch. Senators lined up like vultures on cable news, each one trying to outdo the other in condemning her. One senior lawmaker sneered, "We sent her to represent American interests and instead she gave away the farm." Another quipped with venom, "If she wants to speak for Africa so badly, maybe she should run for office there." The talking heads were relentless. One commentator shouted so loudly on live TV that his toupee nearly slid off. "She went there to sell aid and instead she sold us out." Memes of his meltdown spread faster than his actual arguments, but the message was clear: Washington wanted blood. Crockett had broken an unspoken rule: never, under any circumstances, tell the unvarnished truth. But something was happening outside that echo chamber. The people weren't buying the outrage. The video of President Traoré's tears became one of the most replayed clips of the year. Young people, activists, students, and everyday citizens across the globe were sharing her words. They weren't hearing betrayal, they were hearing honesty. For once, a politician had said what everyone knew but no one dared to admit. And Crockett, far from retreating, met the storm with fire. When cornered by reporters outside Capitol Hill, she quipped, "They're calling me un-American. No, I think for the first time I was exactly American by being bold enough to tell the truth. If they find honesty embarrassing, maybe embarrassment is what we need." The clip went viral instantly. Her wit, her refusal to bend, only fueled her growing image as a political rebel. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, the ripple effects of that one speech were transforming into waves. President Traoré, emboldened by Crockett's candor, announced a series of reforms. Instead of waiting for aid packages wrapped in conditions, he assembled local experts, farmers, engineers, and educators. His message was clear: Burkina Faso will no longer beg for dignity, we will build it with our own hands. It was not a rejection of cooperation, but a demand for equality. American consultants, once accustomed to dictating terms, found themselves sidelined. Traoré told them bluntly, "If you want to help, listen first. If you can't listen, you don't belong here." That statement alone lit up African media. For the first time in decades, an African leader wasn't echoing Western scripts, he was writing his own. In the US, the establishment was desperate to put Crockett in her place. Committees were formed, whispers of censure circulated, and party leaders pressured her to issue a public apology. But Crockett didn't flinch. She told a journalist, "Apologize for telling the truth, that's like apologizing for breathing." That line turned into a rallying cry, plastered across posters, shirts, and social media graphics. Her defiance was more than stubbornness, it was survival. By refusing to bow, she transformed herself from a liability into a symbol. The establishment wanted to destroy her, but the people had already claimed her as their voice. As the storm brewed, Jasmine Crockett realized something extraordinary. She had stumbled into a rare position of power, not because of backroom deals or party loyalty, but because the people themselves had elevated her. Her inbox overflowed with messages from students, activists, and even African leaders thanking her for saying what others wouldn't. One message read simply, "For the first time, I felt like America respected us." Instead of retreating into silence, Crockett went on the offensive. She began drafting legislation with a bold name, the Dignity Act. It was a sweeping proposal aimed at dismantling the conditional strings tied to foreign aid. For decades, aid had been America's tool of influence. Every dollar was a leash. But Crockett's bill sought to flip the model. Aid would no longer be a bargaining chip. Instead, it would be a partnership, guided by the needs and voices of the recipient nations. Of course, Washington scoffed. One senator barked during a hearing, "You're telling me we should just hand out money with no conditions? That's madness." Crockett, unfazed, fired back, "What's madness is thinking control builds trust. What's madness is pretending we're helping when we're really dictating. If we want allies, let's stop acting like landlords." The room went silent for a beat, then erupted into chaos. Outside the chamber, her words struck like lightning. Universities hosted panels about her speech. African newspapers praised her courage. Even comedians got in on the act. A late-night host joked, "Congress usually sends aid with strings attached." Crockett showed up and said, "How about no strings, just vibes?" The audience roared. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, President Traoré moved quickly. Inspired by Crockett's stand, he launched the Future by Our Hands initiative, a nationwide push for self-reliance. Instead of foreign consultants, Burkina Faso engineers drafted infrastructure projects. Instead of imported food aid, investments flowed into local agriculture. And when asked why he shifted so suddenly, Traoré said simply, "Because someone finally asked us what we wanted." The wooden sculpture given to him by the boy in the village remained on his desk. Visitors would often see him glance at it during meetings as though it anchored him. "Kindness unites worlds," it read. To him, it wasn't just a carving, it was proof that dignity mattered more than money, more than treaties, more than applause from foreign powers. But Crockett's crusade didn't come without cost. Lobbyists representing powerful corporations that benefited from conditional aid lined up to stop her. They funded attack ads, painting her as naive, reckless, even dangerous. One particularly dramatic ad declared, "Jasmine Crockett wants to give your money away with nothing in return." It played on repeat during prime time. But instead of weakening her, it only amplified her reach. Crockett embraced the label. At a rally, she smirked and told the crowd, "They say I'm giving away America's money. No, I'm investing in America's soul." The line sent the audience into a frenzy. The battle over Jasmine Crockett's words did not end in the halls of Congress or in the villages of Burkina Faso. It spilled into living rooms, classrooms, and street corners around the world. For some, she was a hero who stripped the mask off American diplomacy. For others, she was a reckless firebrand who embarrassed her nation. But one thing was undeniable: she had forced a conversation no one could ignore. Months after her explosive speech, the Dignity Act passed its first hurdles in committee. Though watered down by compromise, it introduced a groundbreaking clause: any aid package would now require joint approval with representatives from the recipient country. It was a small step, but a seismic one. The message was clear: America could no longer dictate aid unilaterally. Cooperation had become part of the law. Across Africa, the impact was cultural as much as political. Students in universities quoted Crockett's line, "Africa doesn't need saving, it needs to be heard," like scripture. Murals appeared in Accra, Nairobi, and Dakar with her image alongside Thomas Sankara's. For many, she had become a symbol of what honest politics could look like: unpolished, inconvenient, but deeply human. President Traoré, meanwhile, carried forward his reforms with renewed energy. Burkina Faso's farms, once dependent on imported grain, began producing surpluses. Local engineers built roads and water systems without waiting for foreign approval. When asked by a French journalist how he explained this sudden transformation, Traoré gave a sly smile and said, "We stopped waiting for permission." His words drew laughter from his people and nervous silence from the West. Back in America, Crockett's political future remained uncertain. Party elites whispered about sabotaging her next election. But they faced a problem: her popularity had outgrown their control. Every attempt to smear her only fueled her base. At a town hall, when asked if she feared political retaliation, she shrugged. "If the truth costs me my seat, then I'll leave knowing I actually used it." The audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. Late-night hosts kept the jokes alive. One quipped, "Crockett went off script and told Africa the truth. Meanwhile, Congress still can't tell the truth about what's in a hot dog." The crowd howled. Satire had done what satire always does: cemented her rebellion in public memory. But beyond politics, the real legacy was harder to measure. A wooden sculpture sat on the president's desk in Ouagadougou, a reminder that dignity mattered more than dollars. A phrase echoed in classrooms across continents: "Kindness unites worlds." And a generation of leaders, African, American, and beyond, began to wonder if listening could accomplish what decades of diplomacy had failed to do. In the end, Crockett's defiance proved one thing: true change doesn't come from polished speeches written by committees. It comes from one person brave enough to throw the script away. And as history would record, the day Jasmine Crockett pushed aside those papers was the day the world remembered that honesty, though dangerous, is still the most powerful tool of all.